welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 2, Episode 31. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Programming note, I'm trying to shorten the length of the episodes in anticipation of, yes, dear listener, having this podcast be a video on YouTube. Whether or not it's going to be one long video, if I break it up into segments, I haven't figured that out. I haven't figured out video, for that matter. I know from my own consumption of the YouTube that an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour long podcast is not going to garner but so many views that you have to cut it up in more bite-sized, consumable bits. That's where I'm going. I need to start focusing on how I can get there, and the easiest way to do that now is to shorten the length of the episodes rather than lengthen them. On tap for this week, the special master that was appointed in the FBI's seizure of all the documents at Mar-a-Lago. We'll talk about it from a practical standpoint because I don't think that that's actually been done yet. Why a special master exists. We'll talk about lawyers and the practice of law. Oh, it'll be so exciting. The Queen of England died. I don't really care. A belated college football preview. And things are getting better, not worse, even concerning the media. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you, dear listener. Thank you so much for your support. You can give it a like, a review, a thumbs up, distribute to the peoples far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please go over there and support. On to the main attraction.
Act 1, The Special Master.
Most litigators have forgotten more about the law than I'll ever know. Yet I can't sit by and not make at least some comment, have at least one segment on the special master that was appointed in the FBI raid of former President Donald Trump's home residence. This must be what doctors go through, what law enforcement professionals go through, hell, even what politicians and bureaucrats go through when the popular news media, when your favorite news actor and favorite news actress tries to, in all of the hours that they've put on their clothes and their makeup, spend 10, 15, 20 seconds trying to explain what a special master is, why one would be appointed, how that operates within the parameters of a criminal case or a civil case. That doctor, that medical professional, that law enforcement official, that politician or bureaucrat, and this lawyer are all thinking the same thing. The people who populate our news media are fucking idiots. Have to say it, maybe it's a chicken or an egg type argument. Is it the media members? Is it the actual news actors and actresses? Is it their producers? Is it these networks? Is it the corporations that own them? Are they the idiots or are we the idiots? I believe it's like a good educator, whether that educator is a kindergarten teacher, a 7th grade math teacher, a professor in college. There are many. The best teachers, the best educators, are the ones that can take complicated concepts and break them down in a way where they understand their audience. They understand how to educate their audience, whether that be a kindergarten class, a 7th grade math class, a room full of college students. The media, for its part, does not have this capacity. And the best way to start and educate anyone is the foundation. Why would a special master exist in a civil or criminal case? Let's talk about the law. Let's talk about lawyers. One thing that is routinely omitted from any analysis of the law when you're talking about the news media, particularly your cable news networks, it's the lawyers. The lawyers in a legal matter are treated like the politicians, like the bureaucrats. The news media are really nothing more than glorified cheerleaders. Well, we're not going to have a glorified cheerleading session here, dear listener. We're going to talk about the practicalities of the law, and those practicalities are made up of actual lawyers practicing actual law. To start from the beginning, in a civil case in particular, but even in a criminal case, you have an obligation as an attorney to disclose things. It is a silly, silly way that the powers that be in the legal community have tried to convince you, the consumer of legal services, that there's going to be some fairness and efficiency in this process. There is a disclosure requirement. If it is a criminal case, it is the state having to disclose to the defense, this is our case, here's our evidence. You hear most often the disclosure requirement in criminal cases from, of course, the lack of disclosure. And the lack of disclosure is usually associated with what is called exculpatory evidence. That is a fancy word for evidence that the state has that would tend to prove the suspect innocent. If the state has in its possession evidence that does not incriminate the defendant, rather it actually exculpates the defendant, the state has an obligation to turn this evidence over to the defense. But the disclosure requirement is more prominent, more prevalent. It is ever present in civil cases, whether you were the plaintiff or you were the defendant. How does this operate? I sue you or you sue me, it doesn't matter. And let's be frank, lawsuits really don't involve individuals anymore in the legal system in the United States. It's just corporations suing one another. Alas, that is for another segment. You file a complaint, I file an answer. We have an obligation to submit to the court a scheduling order, and we have an obligation to exchange documents in our possession. There are different rules for different states, but there is a discovery obligation. I'm going to disclose to you the documents that I have in my possession related to the matter at hand. You are going to do the same. Now that we've laid the foundation, let's talk about the practice of law. Let's talk about lawyers practicing law. I have an obligation to give you documents in my possession related to the matter. You have an obligation to give me documents in your possession related to this matter. What do I do? What do you do? Well, I don't possess certain documents, and I'm not going to go out and get them, so I don't have to disclose them. I do possess certain documents. I don't think they're related to this matter. I'm not going to disclose them. I have documents in my possession that I believe are privileged for some reason, and I'm not going to disclose those either. So far, so good, right? Now, if I have documents in my possession, if you have documents in your possession that you believe are privileged, what you do is you create what's called a privilege log. This is in accord. This is actually a requirement of the same rules that demand that you disclose documents in your possession related to the matter to the other side. You prepare a privilege log and you say, here are all the documents in my possession. I'm going to give them very generic names. I'm going to then provide you the rationale behind why I believe that they are privileged, and then I'm going to give them a number. I'm disclosing to you that there are documents in my possession that are related to the matter. They're privileged for some reason, and I'm not going to give them to you. Bored enough yet, dear listener? Now is where it gets exciting. Now we're going to talk about the practice of law. What actually happens with lawyers litigating civil and criminal cases in their disclosure requirement? They don't do shit. They miss the deadline for disclosure, they rarely disclose anything, and there's never a privilege log. It is an open, unwritten letter to opposing counsel. Dear opposing counsel, fuck you. This happens every day in the legal community that ends with Y. So, I have my documents. I prepare a disclosure statement. I send them off to you. You may not send me a disclosure statement at all. You may send me some documents. You may not. Because the rules of ethics, of civil procedure, are silly and asinine, I have to go through a number of hoops. I have to jump through hoops like a trained dog in order to bring this matter to the attention of the court. I write you a letter. I send you an electronic mail. I believe that you have documents in your possession. I believe that you owe me a disclosure statement. Lawyers dick around, they delay, and when you can finally get an answer out of an opposing counsel, it's often, I didn't send you anything, because it's all privileged. Well, you might ask, dear listener, where's the privilege log? Well, the attorney never filled one out, never created one, never sent one. Privileged, you might be asking, dear listener. Well, what is the privilege that this attorney, this savvy, sophisticated, experienced litigator may be asserting? It's the same record, it's the same song, it's just a different verse in a different time. It's all attorney-client privilege. It's like the pizza place in the sexually repressed suburban area. It's 2 toppings, 2 2-liter sodas for $10.99. Wash, rinse, repeat. Occasionally attorneys go crazy. They throw extra cheese on that pizza. They'll claim that the documents in their possession are not relevant or are somehow proprietary. Generally, though, it's attorney-client privilege. So what do the attorneys do? They do what attorneys do best. They bicker, they bitch, they obfuscate. Letters go back and forth. Emails go back and forth. Accusations are flung. People who, by their very appearance, are laughably incapable of ever inflicting any kind of harm to any other human being or animal, to be clear, state in most uncertain terms some of the boldest things you'll ever hear. The matter escalates to the point where you may have a hearing in front of the judge that's presiding over the case to resolve the discovery dispute. Oh, this is where you think it gets good, right, dear listener? This is where you think you get that Law and Order moment where the judge presiding over the case bangs down the gavel with a stern, hell, an angry inflection in his or her voice, reprimands the attorneys for not cooperating, reprimands the attorney for failing to provide a privilege log, reprimands the attorney for failing to disclose documents. After the verbal tongue lashing is a fine, is an actual monetary penalty for failure to comply with these sacrosanct rules. As I've said before, dear listener, those superhero movies are not as fantastic as any depiction of the law that you've ever seen on television or in movies. In a bland, emotionless, and frankly tired setting, a judge will go over, roll his or her eyes, and very likely not having read in great detail the pleadings filed by the parties with regard to the discovery dispute, make an order as to what disclosure is actually going to occur. As a side note, I'd like to actually defend judges for a second. As I've stated in numerous podcast episodes, the courts are simply government agencies like any other. They are getting government funding. And as you may already know, dear listener, the courts are getting very little of it. Judges are overworked and they are understaffed. And the last thing that they want to hear from 2 attorneys coming into their courtroom is, they didn't comply with the rules. They're not playing fair. So a judge, in evaluating whether or not documents are actually protected by attorney-client privilege or some other privilege, generally don't want to sit there and have to go through every document, have to go through every argument. There's going to be some level of disclosure. Here's the fun part. Here's the part that's the most exciting part about my 20 years of practicing law. And in a measure of whether or not an attorney will be honest with you, any litigator's practical experience in their career in the law. The judge issues the discovery order, and you just don't comply with it. Now, are you so stupid that you're not going to comply with it altogether? No. The judge says, give the other side all these documents. And you go, okay, I'll give them a third of the documents. I'll give them maybe half the documents. There are letters sent. There are electronic mails sent. There are accusations hurled about. There are harsh, nasty characterizations. There are bold comments about the things that one may or may not do. From, again, some of the least physically capable people you will ever meet in your life. Back to the judge we go. And here's where the judge, or more likely, here's where you, dear listener, or your attorney will say, I don't trust the judgment of this other party, and this has gone on too long, and we need someone who can pay more and detailed attention to these documents, to this discovery dispute, specific to claims of privilege or claims the documents are somehow proprietary or not relevant. We need a special master. We're never going to be able to advance this case unless we can get these documents, unless we can get this discovery dispute resolved. We need a special master. A special master is someone that is usually either a very, very experienced, seasoned attorney in the area of law that the litigation centers on. It can be a retired judge. It is someone that has extensive experience in not only litigation, in not only claims of privilege or proprietary information, or even in information that's relevant, but also has practice in that area of law, has presided over cases in that area of law. A special master is extremely expensive. You are paying this person by the hour, and many of them charge $400, $500 an hour. In bigger, more complex cases, $750, $1,000 an hour. That special master will go through the documents, go through the pleadings that the parties have filed, determine whether or not there are legitimate claims of privilege, legitimate claims of proprietary information, whether documents are truly irrelevant. And in saying this, don't think for a second that any of these claims have any legitimacy. It's easy to simply state, look, this is privileged. Look, this is proprietary. Look, this is irrelevant. And generally, that argument in and of itself carries enough water to create this shit show that would warrant going back to the court in a discovery dispute, and sometimes even rising or escalating to the level of having a special master appointed. In sum, this is a kindergarten class that's way, way overfilled. The kindergarten teacher isn't dealing with 35, 50, 75 students. There's 200 kindergartners in a class. Occasionally, the kindergarten teacher says, I need help because I can't get two of these kids to agree, do my Legos in my pail actually belong to the Batman Gotham set that my neighbor has? Because I've put them in my mouth to the extent that I have, and they fit so well into my Lego set. Are they not now somehow proprietary or privileged? And there's somebody who comes in and helps mediate such a dispute. Now, let's transition very quickly and talk about Donald Trump and the appointment of a special master in this criminal case. Let me sum it up for you in a sentence. It's to fucking muddy the waters. Donald Trump, as I have stated in this very podcast, in other segments, is an acolyte of Roy Cohn, one of the smartest and yet most devious, cunning, ruthless lawyers that has ever come out of the state of New York. No matter the circumstance, you turn it into a fight. You muddy the water, no matter the circumstance. Harken back to the segments I did about Donald Trump and him not paying his contractors. It's a strategy. It doesn't matter whether or not the contractor finished on time or did great work. When you want to renegotiate a contract, you simply don't pay it. If you want to renegotiate that contract and get that other party down to their lowest bottom dollar, you make that party sue you and you make that lawsuit, that litigation, a muddy, convoluted shit show. It is a tried and true strategy. After all of the evidence that's come out, after all of the positions of the parties have been elucidated, Trump doesn't have a lot to rely on to defend himself in light of the documents that he says that he had in his possession, says that he actually turned over, the documents that he kept. This is a way to turn the criminal prosecution into a muddy, convoluted shit show, where Trump is actually asserting a very novel and a yet-to-be litigated defense that, look, this isn't so much for attorney-client privilege, this is executive privilege. And some of those documents are mine and should be mine under executive privilege. And I don't have to turn them over. When the facts are on your side, you argue the facts. When the law is on your side, you argue the law. When you have neither, you argue. Donald Trump and his legal team are making a hell of an argument.
Act 2. The Queen of England died.
The Queen of England died. Well, I guess I know how The Crown ends. I've been pretty clear that I don't give a damn about monarchy. I'm troubled by the extent to which many people are enamored with monarchies, with authoritarian regimes. The fact that it appears in the 21st century that we haven't learned any lessons from authoritarianism, from monarchy, and that many people are gravitating towards authoritarian type figures in order to take back the country. Having said that, rather than shit all over the Queen and the institution that she inhabited for close to 70 years, I would like to comment on the fact that here's a woman who took over as monarch the, I think, arguably greatest colonial power that ever existed, the longest standing colonial power. It still has a monarchy. It still has colonies. Yet look at the transformation over the course of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. When Queen Elizabeth II inherited the throne of England, there were numerous countries that are now independent nation states, hell, that are world powers, that are economic and regional powers. These were English colonies. They were part of the English Commonwealth. Egypt, India, Australia, Canada, the Congo. In the changing 20th century, although England was able to hang on to its monarchy, it's all a symbolic farce. It's truly a figurehead position, and it makes me think about how many of the politicians that we try to elevate to some sort of moral or ethical role model, and how silly it is. King or queen, senator or congressman, president, they're all just people. Although they may hold powerful positions, they're going to live and they're going to die just like the rest of us. They have their strengths and they have their weaknesses just like the rest of us. As you see in the portrayal of the Queen in the Netflix television series The Crown, it's strange the power dynamic between all of the admiration, if you will, the euphoria that surrounds the crown, that surrounds royalty, and on the other side, how that affects the royals, feeling yourself to be so special, to be so unique, which would warrant all of that admiration, all of that euphoria. And yet then realizing that once you've attained that type of recognition, you've reached this peak, you're trapped. It's a fishbowl. You can't get out. You become addicted to and a victim of that power. The boomers still love the royals. They love royalty. I'm hoping in my heart of hearts that as these newer generations grow up with technology, with a better understanding of how governments work, of how people interact with one another, that the infatuation with royalty, with the royal family, is going to go the way of the dodo. And for the royals themselves, for the English royal family, won't that be a relief to perhaps be retired, to be economically sound, to be economically taken care of, and yet not have the weight of responsibility of this silly, archaic ceremonial title? I believe that the poet Bruce Dickinson said it best as lead for the band Iron Maiden in the song Power Slave. Tell me why I had to be a power slave. I don't want to die. I'm a god. Why can't I live on? When the life giver dies, all around is laid waste. And in my last hour, I'm a slave to the power of death.
Act 3, a belated college football preview.
Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State. That's pretty much it. You can take this segment and listen to it in 2023. You can listen in 2024. These 2-hour mega shows, these magazines, all of the previews, all of the speculation. What's it all for? In the 21st century, in the modern college football landscape, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State. Those are the teams that are going to end up in the college football playoff. Barring one of them having a loss or 2 losses, they'll try to create intrigue, they being the media, because, as I just said, those are the 4. They'll try to create intrigue, therefore drive interest, by speculating about which Pac-12 team might get in or which Big 12 team might get in. As a University of Tennessee fan, as someone who is going to watch his football team play both Alabama and Georgia every season, I just can't get but so excited about the college football season. Not the entire season, not the season for my team. We all dream, we all aspire that our football team, particularly our college team, is going to rise to these lofty heights, that's going to be one of these elite 4 or 5 teams that's going to be able to compete for a national championship. Alabama may stumble, Georgia may stumble, Ohio State stumbled last year. Year in and year out, though, it's going to be 4 football teams. What's worse is that let's say one of those 4 stumbles and the 4th team comes in with all of the hopes of the college football community, everyone who follows the sport, everyone who has a rooting interest in seeing some level of parity. Those teams routinely get killed. I'm looking at you, Michigan. I'm looking at you against Georgia. I'm looking at you, Cincinnati. I'm looking at you, every Pac-12 team that's made the college football playoff. Perhaps I'm unique in this sentiment, but getting that second place trophy for just having made the college football playoff and not being able to advance in any meaningful way, that doesn't mean much to me as a fan. So between the big 4, I have to go with either Alabama or Georgia. They are clearly, at this point, a head and possibly shoulders above Clemson and Ohio State being the X factor. And as much as it pains me to say it, I believe Georgia repeats as national champion. Why do I say that? I don't believe that Notre Dame is as good a team as many people are making them out to be. I could be completely wrong, but I don't believe that Notre Dame was deserving, warranted the hype that it was receiving leading up to the game against Ohio State. I think Oregon, on the other hand, is much better than they showed against Georgia. I just think that Georgia is that damn good, that it's basically a semi-pro team. And in running the gauntlet that is the college football season, I believe Georgia is only going to face one opponent that's going to be able to stand up, compete against that defense, compete against that offense, give them a game. That team is Alabama. Ohio State is always an X factor because of the fact that their offense is so explosive. Who knows what they can do in any individual game? No team, though, wants to play against Alabama's defense, and no team wants to play against Georgia's defense. Oregon is equally an explosive football team, and Georgia completely smashed them and shut them down. In sum, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia, your repeat national champion. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Act 4. Things are better, not worse, even concerning the media.
The narrative that things are so much worse today is so prevailing, it's hard to see when we actually adopt this mindset, this outlook, even though all of the evidence is to the contrary. I try to remind myself that we're living in the best time that has ever existed for human beings to live. And I want to do that more and more often on this podcast. It's not an easy endeavor. This isn't something that comes naturally to human beings, and it certainly doesn't come naturally when what is promoted and sold, what people most want to consume, is fatalism. One of the prevailing attitudes in this country is that it used to be so great here, and it's not so great anymore. I'm sure there are a number of things that we can point to, dear listener, and state this is much worse now than it was 40, 50 years ago. And that's what we like to focus on. Yet for every one of those things, there's probably 2 or 3 other things that we could point to where we would say, oh, well, that's much better than it was 40 or 50 years ago. Let's reverse that. I like to say this on the podcast. Let's look at it from below instead of from above. There are things that we believe to be worse today. They were so great back then, and now they're bad. Where I believe that the window of social media, of these electronic mediums that we are all now a part of, all they're doing is opening up the fact that these things were never really great in the first place. It was only our imagination, our belief, maybe even social proof that others believed it to be true, that these things were ever great. I'm going to, as much as I can, endeavor to stop bashing the media in this country. Why? It came through me in the piece that I was doing on Donald Trump, the FBI raid at Mar-a-Lago, and the special master. Once again, I have much disdain for the way the media covered the entire thing, and I have much disdain for the way the media sensationalized this motion for a special master and the fact that it was granted. After reflecting on the piece, it just occurred to me, this is the media. This has probably been the media from its inception. The media is a business. It's always trying to sell. It needs something to sell. And if it doesn't have anything to sell, it's going to make something up to sell. Why are you getting so upset about it? Right. Why am I getting so upset about it? It's because I still have in me this belief that at one point the media wasn't that way, that somehow things have gotten worse, whereas in some previous time, on some previous date, things were better. And it's just not the case. Real journalism is always going to be supplanted in the media by things that sell, things that are sensational. Real journalists aren't going to be on television. They're not going to be news actors and news actresses. They aren't telling the types of stories that are going to afford them that opportunity. It is only now with social media and all of the different mediums, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, hell, even TikTok, that you have an opportunity for an independent or a freelance journalist to tell a story without having the media companies be the gatekeeper for whether or not the public has access to that information. I've stated this idea before on the podcast. Things are getting better. Although the media looks to be a complete and total shit show, and it is, it's always been a complete and total shit show. It's not that things were once good and now they're bad. It's now we are aware of how bad things have always been. That is a good thing. What's the solution? The solution is sitting right in front of us. It's these mediums that independent and freelance journalists have access to reach us, to access us as a public. Of course, that beggars the question, who owns these new media companies, these social media outlets, and are they going to have a completely unbiased, are they going to have a free and open platform for independent and freelance journalists to access, to utilize in order to disseminate that information? We know the answer to that question is no. We know who these people are, and they're not going to allow for free and unfettered access. But just as these social media apps have opened our eyes, have shined the proverbial light onto the mainstream media, we can likely look forward to something else that's going to be the same type of window, the same type of access into these social media companies. And there very well may be a viable alternative to them within the next 5 years, the next 10 years. Things are always getting better, and it is the individual that has to adopt that optimistic outlook so that we can identify all of the good that's going on instead of being corralled into focusing only on the things that are bad. I can't say that I'm a master in this practice, though I can say that I'm getting better. I am aware and I'm trying. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.